The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus came to Capernaum with his followers, and on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. Yesterday we concluded the celebration of the Christmas season with the remembrance of the baptism of the Lord. And today we find ourselves going back into ordinary time, the regular kind of pattern or cycle, if you will, of remembrance of Jesus' teachings and ministry. And we begin today specifically with the first miracle story that Mark produces for us in his account of Jesus' ministry. Now, of the four Gospels, Mark is the first that was written, and is also perhaps the simplest comparison because it shows still kind of an initial surprise as to what this Jesus is all about. And it is only with time and the maturing of the church community that the Gospel writers begin to kind of fill in the pieces that are not necessarily found in Mark. But because of that, also Mark being the simplest and also the most early of accounts carries with itself a kind of very special place in the history of the church's life because it bespeaks that initial experience of who Jesus was like. We find that this first miracle takes place at Capernaum, and Capernaum seems to be the centering point initially for Jesus' ministry. And we find two things happen here. Already kind of the road is set for what will take place. First of all, that he speaks with great authority, an authority which they did not see in many of their own leaders. At the same time, he also is able to heal and bring people out of the concerns and needs that they have. And Mark will continue to build upon that in the course of the gospel text as he keeps showing us these different experiences that Jesus has in both curing and in teaching. For the early church, and in turn for us, it is a reminder of how unique that whole plan of God was. For century upon century, there have been plans to bring us back into the fold, if you will. And it only came to fulfillment, as we know, in the coming of Jesus as the Word made flesh. And in the course of that experience from that point on, the church continued to mature and grow as it understood who this Jesus was. Today, then, as we begin our ordinary journey, let us be mindful of the fact that when all is said and done, there's nothing ordinary about it at all. There's a great salvation message that's being spoken to us in the gospel story and the experience of Jesus. And what was fresh and live in that time some 2,000 years ago continues to be fresh and alive for us.